if you flip open your books for a moment and you kind of look inside, let's give you kind of the lay of the land, what we've got. There are 3 chapters and an appendix. The first chapter I've already begun to speak to is the one that focuses on system modeling and systems thinking. There's one main tool that we're going to be covering in that, and that's the system map. But it'll also touch on gap analysis, and it'll also touch on basically trying to figure out how to prioritize what's important, because you got dozens and dozens of areas of opportunity to explore. How do I figure out what to go after first? As far as chapter 2, once I've looked at the details of the players and so forth, and I want to go into the weeds, then I start moving into these type of formats where I have top-down flow charts and responsibility charts and cross-functional flow charts. There's 5 other variations of a theme, each of which has a strength, but each has a weakness. Now, when an architect designs a house, do they present a single picture to the builder and say, build this? The answer is probably no. What do they give?
Different viewpoints.
Okay, and it's a stack of prints. And each of those stack of prints is generally for a specific trade. So an electrical schematic is not the same as a plumbing schematic, which is not the same as a foundation print, which is not the same as the finishing carpenter's requirements to do the cabinetry in the kitchen. And so when you think about it in a business, when I look at a business, it's more than just the operational point of view. It's a financial point of view, it's a compliance point of view, it's a human development point of view, which means when we do process documentation, you need to be taking into account each of the different functional groups that need the documentation. And because a plumbing schematic looks different than an electrical schematic, even if you're an electrical engineer, you would know these things, right? Financialese is not the same as legalese, which is not the same as operationalese. So each of our business communities have their own spoken language. They have their own terminology. They have their own requirements. So I have to figure out is how much detail do I need, because I'm going to build the layers of this very, very complex thing. And when you think about what do most of your training manuals have in them? What's the format? What's the structure? What's the level of detail? Who's it written for? This is where you respond. Okay, and are all the end users of like nature? So a training manual is not going to have the same type of information as a compliance manual, which is not going to have the same documentation that's required from a financial controls manual if you're doing SOX compliance. Scripts for someone who's at a call center is going to have different levels of detail than a person that's basically trying to do an overall audit for the purposes of ISO certification. I mean, there's all these different folks that have different needs, and we have to design and build the documentation that suits them. And honestly, one size will not fit all. So then the question becomes is, how do I get as much detail as I possibly can without killing myself? Because once you create it, someone's got to maintain it. That opens up a whole other Pandora's box of issues, okay? But we first have to have the baseline, okay? So there's 2 main functions of this class, which is to talk about things systemically and then to dive into the weeds. There's an implementation component to this, which honestly, even though there is a chapter 3, it gets covered as we do chapter 1 and 2 to a great extent, because I can't talk about the tool without talking about what are the pitfalls and the trip points and the problems associated with using the tool. Because as you dive in, once again, those blinders come up, and I've got to have strategies of how to deal with those circumstances when I encounter them. We will talk about it. It's more of a footnote and an exclamation point at the end of the day tomorrow.